Good morning. We are the House Transportation Committee. Happy Friday. It is Friday, February 24th, and the agency requested some time to come in and talk on the topic of the governor's proposed FY24 budget, specifically on the funding of the IIJA state match for FY25 and 26. And as a committee, remember, this is not new. I don't think this is new information, but we're going to hear. I mean, we've been talking about some of this in our deliberations around, the revenue and what's needed to support the transportation fund of projects. So here, welcome Bradley Kuchenberger and Ann Gamble from the Agency of Transportation. So welcome back.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having us in this morning. For the record, I'm Bradley Kuchenberger. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the agency.
And for the record, I'm Ann Gamble. I'm the Chief Engineer for the Agency of Transportation.
And we appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more just in general. Really, we're here this morning to talk about the context of where the $79 million of general funds in the governor's FY24 budget came from, which will support agency projects in 25 and 26 as well. And just give you some overall context of what that is. And then we also thought it would be prudent to demonstrate potential risk to the agency's capital programs if we didn't have those funds available in some form or fashion. And so we've handed out and put online a copy of this presentation. What you also have is a list of potentially impacted projects should this $79 million not be available to the agency in these FY24, 25, and 26. And then there's a map. On the printout, it's a little small, but online it's a little bigger, and we've got a version of the map as well.
Thank you.
It's for your own perusal. So I wanted to revisit the methodology and the context of where we came up with this idea and this need, really, that the agency has to match the large and historic funding levels offered to all states, but in Vermont in particular, we're very heavily dependent on our federal funds. We wanted to avail ourselves of as much IIJA or bipartisan infrastructure law funds as possible. And so in that spirit, the governor's office asked us to come up with a listing of what we saw as a funding gap over the next few years, and if we could break that out into some more specific detail. So what we put in front of on page 3 is really the listing of where we would invest $79 million and what projects in particular we could advance, either using the increased amount of FHWA formula funds that became available through the IIJA or through some of the competitive and discretionary grant programs that are offered through that law. So we have a list here that demonstrates the variety of projects that we would be able to pursue, and the state fund portion, the federal fund portion, and the total project cost of those items. I think the highlight there is just to meet normal increased levels of formula grant programs over fiscal year 24, 25, and 26. We would need approximately $32.6 million of state funds to match approximately $130 million of federal dollars. And then all the remaining projects below are in part related to the discretionary competitive grant programs that are available through the IIJA.
So what's the color, the green, what's the significance of the green versus the white?
The green versus the white, so we did also part of the governor's budgeting process was they wanted to have us create a kind of tier choice of investment. So we put together projects in the order of which we think they are we have projects available that meet eligibility requirements or that the funding is guaranteed. And so that's really the first two tiers here. There's the core programs, which all or most of our projects that we would have in our normal capital program are eligible. We have projects ready. They're good to go. And the funds are already scheduled and slated to come to state of Vermont. The next bit are what are called competitive or discretionary grant programs under the bill.
All four of those that are highlighted in
All
green?
four of those that are the next ones highlighted in green. However, those are all subject to what's called, they have minimums for all states. So we know that the funding is guaranteed and we have projects eligible. So these first two sections are sort of like 1A and 1B in that they're similar, in that we have eligible federal programs to meet those project needs, and we have eligible projects ready to rock to apply for those grants, but we know that we're almost guaranteed or pretty much guaranteed to get them. And then the next sections are only one tier down of sort of, we're still very likely to get these grants. Either some of these RAISE or rural RAISE or infra grant projects, which is what all of these are a part of. Some of the requirements are more difficult and there isn't the small state minimum. However, given the projects that we have and our known success rate in previous years, we still think that those are highly likely, if not guaranteed like the ones before. And finally, the last one for aviation, that's in its lowest tier just because we don't have yet specific project ideas for those funds, but those funds are available to us. You will. We would be sure to find those projects, but they aren't specified as of a few months ago when we were putting this together.
So if I may, a follow-up is, I know that sometimes with federal grants, you're awaiting the details of the guidance. Where, with those four buckets, can you explain maybe where you are with having that?
Yeah, so we have the guidance for the first line, which is the formula dollars. We have that. And then the next section, we do have those as well. The infra grants, we are, it's a bucket of projects and grant funding that has a history to it. So we're pretty confident we have everything we have, but I don't believe we've received those for those yet specifically. But we're anticipating them and using our historic knowledge for those.
Because those are not part of IIJA or the IRA,
They are part of the
But
IIJA. They've been programmatic funding areas for a long time.
Gotcha, okay.
You know, they're just like everything in the IIJA by 30% or more.
Can I just clarify that we're talking about the green, that's.
He's going down from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, from the top to the bottom.
So the last thing we were talking about was
The second white area.
Oh, the second white, got it, okay.
Project.
the RAISE infra, rural RAISE infra, or the grant programs.
So
Yeah, sure.
all the, needed $79 million of state funds to match $341 in kind for federal projects. We were given the go-ahead to do that and built our capital program as such.
Okay.
So the next slide is it's very wordy, but I thought it was important to state things in a clearer fashion. But we're looking at the
Oh, sorry, Representative Burke.
Hi, I just have a question for you, Lynn.
Yeah.
So the public transit money,
Yeah.
is this something that's already been programmed?
I'm not sure to the extent it's been programmed, but it was part of, in the Infrastructure Act, it was sort of like the National EV program in which it's guaranteed dollars for a specified scope of projects. And public transit has a similar portion of that. And so we'll be able,
A generic public transit project?
yeah, it could go to a generic public
But
transit.
is
type
this gonna
project.
be adding on to the money that's already available for public transit?
In the future years, yes.
Future years? Okay.
Yes. In our, we would plan to program those projects in fiscal 25 and 26.
Okay, so this would be in like a little extra money
A little
over
extra.
on the top of what you would normally,
That's exactly
budget.
right.
And I think in the next slide, there's some detail on what fiscal year the
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide, we built our capital program, but then we were asked to do a exercise, which we presented to you, of what if we didn't have those funds available at $79 million. So it's broken out between FY 24, 25, and 26. So our asset management group and partners at Highways and our other modal areas, we did an analysis of what it would mean to kind of claw back those state funds over the capital program that we presented. And it demonstrates quite a significant impact, or more than a significant impact, to project schedules and delivery. And so this is the budgetary slide, and then there's some more project details later. But I think there's one particular point that our asset management group wanted to impart on everyone, and I want to relay to you, is that once we have our capital program built, if we start the question of what would happen if we delayed projects to a future fiscal year to save state funds, it really begins what we've been calling a cascade effect, in that you're in this scenario, we would have to already delay projects in fiscal year 25 and 26 to meet this level of less funding if we didn't have the $79 million of general fund. But additional projects from previous years would have been delayed too. So you have the cascade effect of showing a really significant impact over the period of time, especially as you get out to fiscal year 26. So they did a scenario in that they looked at all of the projects that were not under construction, not advertised, and looked at what could potentially be delayed in 24. And to reach this target number, if we were to cut the $79 million, we'd have to reduce a total of $76.4 million worth of projects in 24, which would kick them into the future fiscal years of 25 and 26. The Highways Division projects are on the top line. That would create a situation in which we'd have to delay $191 million worth of projects, all funds, in 25 in a scenario in which we'd have to delay a further $284.7 million worth of projects in 26. The other rail competitive grants, public transit investments, and airport improvement grants are shown, and those are related to the competitive and discretionary project list that we showed above. So all told, if we were not to receive the $79 million for fiscal year 24, 25, and 26, the way we had built the capital program, it could result in project impact totaling $655 million worth of projects. And then lastly, I wanted to add just a fiscal note, which I know a lot of you are aware of, but there's never really a more cost-effective time to begin a large construction project than the present moment. In that, especially given our significant inflationary environment, each of these projects, if subject to delays, would also cost more in the future than they would now. So that's another factor in the cascade effect that you see of why, if we cut $79 million, would it be such a bigger, a larger impact to our project portfolio in future years.
So I just want to clarify a couple of things. I think just in FY24, the total, that 12.3, there's 10.9 million in the general fund for this fiscal year, and then the remainder is being carried in the transportation. Right, and then the other things. Right. So I think, the conversation that's going on in this body is like, I don't know if there's so much a debate about that these are projects, and we never want to leave federal dollars on the table.
Sure.
But it's how we generate revenue to pay for that. I think that's at the crux of this. So there might be differences of opinion. So we had a couple of people. Can we pause there for a couple of questions? So I think Representative Campbell had a question, and then Representative Pouch and Representative McCoy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm feeling obtuse about this. I'm not really understanding. You said, Madam Chair, you said 10.9 of the 12.3 is,
Yeah, if you pull out your FY24 budget.
Okay.
This is where we're looking, you can see on the transportation on a page that Chris Roop has.
Maybe I should start with that. And then
Yeah, so, which might be helpful for the committee to look at that while we're having this discussion. I probably should have said that at the beginning. And if you look at the bottom, the way that Chris has done this is alignment with the proposal. He's just organized a little bit differently. He takes things out at the bottom. So there's a line on line 89 of our sheet that's transferred to the general fund, from the general fund to the T fund. That's where that number is.
let me find that first.
Yeah. All right. So Representative Pouch.
So this outline with the colors showing, some are grants that we sort of expect we'll get. So potentially there might be more out there in the future as there's clarification of the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's correct.
Potentially.
So the list of those grants that we have identified that we would pursue they meet the requirement of, we know what the grants are, we know we have projects ready to be eligible for those grants, and we think those projects would be competitive if they were needed to compete in a pool of other projects. So as we learn more, there's a possibility that there would be more opportunity in the future.
And just to follow up, if you got less than the 79 million, is there some priority on here that you would go after? That's sort of one question. And for example, the Quechee Bridge is on here. If you got no funds, no fiscal funds, where's the priority of that? Why is that one here? Did it get added above the priority of what we thought we were doing? Or is it just, I do, I think, yeah. But in other words, if you got no money, would the Quechee Bridge go into the regular budget and something else would come out?
Yeah, so this is where we have to if we looked at what we would reduce in terms of projects, and then we gave you a potential of the projects impacted, a listing of those and put in.
Is that what this is? I mean, it doesn't have a header, so is that what that is?
That's what those are, and so, I was gonna run through an example of those, but it's you have to go back to looking at the whole program as a whole and seeing, okay, what would we delay in this year? How would that affect the priority that we had set for the previous year? And that kind of shifts everything. And then again for the next year. So the prioritization process still is true. It just gets delayed, for lack of a better word. So if all of those projects that were on the initial list that we go for competitive grants for are in some way, shape, or form in our capital program.
Right.
And so they would, there's potential for, like those projects we listed for competitive grants. They are tagged for potential investment for those competitive grants, but they are also just in the mix of our prioritization. So if we were not able to go after those competitive grants, they would just go back to their normal slot, if you will, in the prioritization process.
Okay, great. Representative McCoy, you had,
Yeah, I just want, this is just monies, this isn't
This is money.
projects.
So yeah, if we were to go to projects, here's a summary of the projects in there.
So the monies that you're showing us are those projects on the next page.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, but that's in today's dollars.
in today's dollars.
So you don't know, like, in 3 years from now, after 26, these numbers may not even fund the projects that are on the next page because of inflation. Or the projects are considerably higher due to inflation.
Yeah, we do consider it an inflationary factor,
Okay.
but we don't know if they'd be correct.
Okay,
You know?
so based on the inflationary factor that you're using for FY '26, this is what you feel we will.
Yeah, this is what we have, and the project's estimates line up with what's in your white book.
Okay.
So it's basically, if our estimates were right, these are the projects that would be impacted.
Okay,
If our estimates were off in either direction, it would change.
okay, great, thank you.
yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. Do all these projects add up to 32.6 on the state end?
All of those projects add up to, on the state end, $93 million.
So what is this 32.6 gap funding performance? Why wouldn't it be that's our gap? Why is it more?
Because we're talking about a total amount of $79 million. So a lot of these projects, besides the rail, public transit, and aviation, are projects that live within the capital program anyway. This would just be additional federal dollars we'd be able to pull down. So we're really talking about a value of projects impacted of $79 million. However, to achieve that savings, if we were to have to, based on the projects that we would have to delay in a given fiscal year, it would result in a total project state fund cost of $93 million. And that's due to the total cost of the project and not being able to like partially fund them, or just the way it works out. Yeah.
So I have a question. You know, unlike the capital budget, which the capital budget is a 2-year budget, and we work on that in 1 year. It helps with the flow, to know that there's money the next year to, but even with that, even within a 2-year budget, you see a 10-year timeline, for projects. And I think you have a similar process at V-Trans, right? That you have capital projects and they're laid out. So I guess, this might be a beginner's question or a fundamental question, but, I appreciate that you need the state match for federal dollars. But why do you need us to make this decision this year for FY '25 and '26? That's the thing that, I think help me understand that. I'm not trying to be
Yeah.
threatening in any way, but like, we have a annual budget process.
I'll answer that.
Well, but we have a white
We're
book,
gonna spend it and we're not gonna have the money next year and then we're gonna have to raise taxes. That's the bottom line. If we don't set aside this money right now, every other committee's gonna grab it. Oh, look what we have. We're gonna grab it and grab it. And next year, when we're asking for our, whatever it is for next year, bottom line, it's not gonna be there. So then what do? We're gonna have to raise taxes on our citizenry that can't even afford the taxes we're making them pay now. We're like, what, one of the fifth highest in the nation in taxes? I want to grab this money and set it aside for transportation. I'm sick and tired of giving 20 million to JTOP and 50 million to education out of transportation dollars. If you want to grab that money back.
and we're gonna,
All well and good, but there's gotta be a point when this committee stands firm and says, this is our money, we need the state match. For every dollar we spend, we're gonna grab $4 from federal, it's a no-brainer to me. It's $4 of federal money for every dollar we get. Take the money and run. Set it aside this year for the next 3 years. I don't get it. Why we're even having this discussion. We should be on the bandwagon and yelling and screaming like, we need this money. Your bridges and roads are falling apart. How many people?
I don't think,
Communities.
Senator McCoy, I hear what you're saying.
I'm very passionate about
I
this.
can hear that. I can hear the passion. And I think we just need to really, the committee needs to fully understand, because I think there is a question about how we raise the revenue, because we do know, and the returning members understand JTAC, newer members don't understand that. When we pull that over, then it leaves a hole someplace else. And that impacts all of our citizens and could potentially impact property taxes, which none of us want to do.
And then
So-
IIJA is gone in 2027. It's gone.
And so I guess
We need this money now.
Bradley, I would say the reason that the administration is asking for us to commit this is that will those dollars, those IIJA dollars disappear? Will they not be available? I just really want to hear your testimony on that.
I understood the question to be why now?
Yeah.
Why, and I think the answer to that is because the general fund surplus was available now. And there's no guarantee that it'd be available in the future. I think that's really the long and short of it, of why now.
And so at the same time, we know that there's something, I don't have the exact number, but there's something like 60 million in one-time cash funds that got put into the capital budget for building other things. That's another place. I mean, that's part of the bigger picture in the conversation. There's a lot of different places where this one-time money is. And for this committee, I think it's really important that we understand where that money is so that we are making an informed decision here. So with all due respect, we're gonna get there, but this is why we're having this testimony today. So I think I'd like to hear more about, I think members are concerned about this sheet that you provided us and the map, and I'd like to give you some time to talk a little bit more about that, or if members have questions, because this is projects that would be, impacted by this. So I want to make sure you have time to fully flesh that out, and for people who might have questions about that.
Yeah, so I think it's a good opportunity we wanted to summarize what the projects would be that would be impacted with these funds. So there's 200 on your list. There's 223 projects in total, and the total value of those projects is approximately $655 million, all funds together. And there's a summary of how they're broken out here, and then in the listing, we move to the list. So if we look at the list, we wanted to make sure you knew exactly how to review this information. So we have it broken out by county. And there's the county, what type of project, what program it's in, the project name, in number. These are really for us and how we bucket them and account for them appropriately. But more interesting for everybody else would probably be the route number and the brief project description. So these are the projects that we're discussing when we talk about kind of the FY 24, 25, and 26 $79 million investment of general funds.
So does public transit, Representative Burke, how does that fit?
In here as well.
I think at the end, maybe.
At the end.
Okay, because that was Representative Burke's question, I think, right?
Yeah, so if we go, the non-highways modes, so rail, aviation, and public transit projects are listed at the last page. Some of which, like public transit projects, don't have county names and they don't fit exactly into the way we organize the highway division projects.
So do members have questions about any of this? We're gonna have to wrap up fairly soon, but I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Representative Burke, I see your hand.
Well,
Now-
I mean, it sounds like what we have to decide is, like, where's the money gonna come from?
Yeah, be clear, nobody's canceling
Yeah.
anything, we're gonna have the
Yeah.
money, it's just gonna
Yeah.
come down
And
where,
so,
Yeah.
so,
So quick.
yeah, let's move on.
um,
We'll have that conversation.
I mean, I, can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
You know, when you look at what the options are, using money from the general fund, I mean, this is like unprecedented money. And so does it make sense to use money from the general fund, like, to advance that? Because we could probably be getting more. I mean, my recommendation would be that it's not something that is anything that the administration wants to do, would be like even just do a temporary raising of maybe get a fee bill and $2 to registration or something like that, just as a temporary measure to help offset. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We want to meet it, we want to use the money, we don't want to cancel projects. That would just be my proposal. I don't know what's being considered in general in terms of fee bill.
Yeah, so this, I mean, I just to wrap up, I don't think there's really a question that that we're gonna leave these federal dollars on the table. And I think it's just about how we do it, so.
So we are happy to work with you on coming to a consensus on how to do that. I've listed on the last page of our slide, this is a slide I presented to this committee before, some of the options available to you, which I know that you know, but from the administration's perspective, obviously the main proposal would be the governor's recommended budget of the $79 million of general fund transferring to the transportation fund over the next 3 fiscal years.
This is,
We've been through
You've
this.
been through this, but Bradley, thank you. You know, you're carrying someone's water. And, there was a press conference, was it yesterday or Wednesday, that the governor made on this?
They would make this very clear.
Yeah, so this is part of that. So we appreciate you coming before the committee and having this conversation.
So you have any idea?
Would you like me to leave this larger map available to you to peruse, or I was also tasked with bringing it home with me, so it's up to you.
I'm afraid it's a very nice map, but I'm afraid it might get bashed up.
Yeah.
And that is so, and it's, hopefully you're not taking the bus today. So, all
All
right.
right, well, thank you all very
And
much.
thanks, and
Please reach out if you have any other questions.
thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great, so as we are we're gonna transition, we have on our agenda Michelle Boomhauer to come on up. The committee has been, just to set up the conversation, the committee has been this past week, looked at H101 and discussed a few things that we wanted to consider and pull into the bill. And so I wanted to give Michelle Boomhauer the opportunity to come in to speak on some of those things. I don't think, my intention this morning wasn't to go through the section by section, but I think to share that, some of the things that the committee is contemplating and to get your feedback on how the agency would respond to some of that. So I would say to the committee, if you want to bring out, might be helpful if you wanted to bring out the copy of the bill, H101. There are a number of things that we have already started to eliminate or that the committee is not. So we've gotten some answers to yesterday about Amtrak, for example, about some things that are not possible. So I think what the committee has been discussing is the sections that relate to complete streets and that I think that might be helpful to focus there. The other thing that we've been talking about is public transit, but I don't want to fall later this morning. We're going to be hearing from Ross McDonald about some of that. And then I think it could be helpful, while we haven't gone through the language specifically, I think it could be helpful, Michelle, if you could respond in some way around there's a good amount in this bill that concerns TCI and revenue, which is essentially revenue, like how we are thinking about raising revenue to address our future climate needs that are outlined in the climate action plan. And then I think maybe last is there are a lot of sections in here, and this might be something that we could just address in a kind of cursory way and then drill down on it. But there's a lot of requests for different kinds of reports. And here, and I know that when we've heard testimony from Andrea Wright, that some of that is being incorporated into the climate reduction plan, but I think it could just be helpful to address that here too. Is that too much to try to do?
No, not at all. I have to say I haven't sliced and diced this via like the reports.
Okay, then.
And I'm happy to talk about the climate piece related to reports.
Then maybe we can.
Yeah.
Maybe we can look at that. Maybe a few members of the committee could sit down with you and look at that and just see what that is. That might be the best. And I know you're away next week, so we could do that after that. So anyway, that's kind of a lot of them. I think I've summarized where we are as a committee. So welcome back, Michelle.
Thank you very much. Michelle, for the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. And if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, maybe I'll just start with the climate piece first.
Sure,
I think it's pretty concise.
Maybe we can refer to those sections.
Yeah, I will give the section numbers. So section 18 in the bill would be modifications to the Green Book statute related to the general statement of policy and transportation planning that the agency adheres to and guides the work of the agency. And what this section would do would be to you'll see in your language that the comprehensive energy plan has been codified in statute as a reference point for this section. And this language speaks to doing the same thing for the climate action plan. And it also has some references to the Global Warming Solutions Act and transportation resilience. And at this time, the language this came up last year. This language is not new to us. We did not support the language last year as constructed. And part of this is we have a kind of a bit of a moving target right now with the new federal investments around the climate reduction program and the climate reduction strategy that Andrea has spoken to you quite a bit about, as well as the PROTECT program, which is about resilience. And So we are in the process of developing both the plan for carbon reduction and the plan for transportation program resilience under the guidelines of the federal effort. And we believe that once we get to the back end of that process, there might be a better way to sort of more strategically capture what should be in statute specific to these transportation plans rather than globally related to the climate action plan, which covers many sectors. So that's essentially where we stand in terms of that policy recommendation. I'll pause there.
Any questions for Michelle? Representative Burke.
I wonder about then, possibly referencing what you just said in statute, that the agency is in the process of developing a carbon reduction plan and a plan for resilience. I don't know, I'm just asking that question, if there would be some way to write that in as sort of a way of acknowledging that this is happening.
That's a great suggestion, Representative Burke. And I think what my suggestion would be that in session law, that we could have something in the T-bill that references this work that is occurring and that directs the agency to come back with a recommendation for a change to this section of statute pending the outcome of that, the development of those two plans. So we're happy to work with Anthea on that language if that would be something the committee was interested in.
I think it could be useful, and then the committee can decide, because we're working on some drafts, and then it sounds like there's some interest here, so. Because next week we're going to be working on some work.
Okay, great. The next section has to do with the transportation planning process. And this language was also proposed last year. There's a couple of minor corrections related to how multimodal is depicted, but this also, again, references the climate action plan rather than specifically referencing, because at that time we hadn't started on that effort, the new carbon reduction strategy and protect plan. So I'd be happy to sort of incorporate that same reference in session law relative to this section in terms of coming back with recommendations when the two planning processes are completed. That is section 19.
Page 33.
32.
32, 33, right?
Okay. Any other questions on those sections? Okay, that was quick.
That was, yeah.
All right. So now we'll move on to complete streets. And
Section 20.
yeah, starting with section 20. There's a number of sections here.
Is section 22?
Yeah, well, section 20 has
20.
some minor modifications to the statement of policy. And once again, we get into the climate action plan reference coming into the complete streets language. And so I think I would recommend that maybe that for that particular section on statement of policy that I see what I can do with trying to work up a recommendation instead of using the climate action plan as a reference within the complete streets section of statute. So that would be my recommendation there, and I'm happy to take suggestions.
Representative Dodge?
Yeah, so are you, just so we're clear, we're talking about on page 35, section 20, I see complete streets mentioned on line 13. Is that where
I'm afraid I don't have a copy of the bill in front of me. I just have my reference notes.
You know, I might have a copy.
Say that we are.
Yeah.
Page 35, line 11.
Oh, I'm with you now. Okay. I'm not quite sure about that.
Further down, actually.
Way the way the complete streets in parentheses is set up there as a language change. That is a way I've not seen it. So I'm not sure if that's meaning to add complete streets, which usually would be underlined. So I'm a little confused there.
Michelle, we're getting you a copy if you want to have it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Very nice. And we're, what page, 35?
I think that was, it starts, section 20 starts on page 35, but I think that you might have been talking about some language that's on the following page at the top.
Okay.
Referencing the climate action plan, like on the bottom of 35, is that, am I correct?
Yes.
Top, this one right here.
Yeah.
The bottom of the 35 to the top.
Okay. So, once again, we're recommending that recommendations of the climate action plan, and it doesn't specifically identify which recommendations would be included in this section. And then it goes on line 3 of page 36 to talk about the agency shall coordinate planning, education, and training efforts with those of the Vermont Climate Council and those of regional planning. So this really is getting more back, I guess, it's sort of, I'm not sure why it's in the complete streets section, and if anybody has a, a suggestion on that. I'm happy to take a closer look at that and see if there's a modification that could relate.
Consult with Kelly.
Yeah.
Or
Kelly, okay. Yep.
But I think it's just I think the main thing is like sort of blending all these things together. Complete streets, climate action plan, carbon mitigate, all and all these things we working together. I think that's the goal.
I understand. Okay.
Transportation and land use.
Harmonization. Yes. We do a lot of transportation land use harmonization in our efforts.
So it sounds like there's some willingness to work on the goal, what you said, Molly, so well. So rather than us right now wordsmith it, right? Sorry.
Yeah, we can work with Anthea, and I will check in with Bonnie to see if she has any thoughts or where that language came from.
Okay, that would be great. That's good.
And for the committee, the process is going to be, nothing's being decided. We're asking things to kind of be refined and come back into the committee for us to look at. Okay. And then we'll make some decisions.
So then if we go to the top of page 37, this is a modification to, I think it's the Green Book. I'm still with you folks on being able to follow the flow in these documents, but this is talking about considering the safety and accommodation of all transportation users, including motorists, cyclists, public transportation users, pedestrians. And instead of saying all of that, it's consider complete streets principles, which encompasses all of that. And so we definitely are in concurrence with that. That language is fine. And then I think the section that starts on line 6 goes into more detail about when you won't do, and going down in through there, when you don't use a complete streets principle, documenting why you didn't use it and what the cost would have been to have incorporated it, et cetera. So that all that language is removed. And basically says, we're going to consider complete streets principles in all state projects and including project planning, development, construction, maintenance, except in the case of projects or project components involving unpaved highways. So it kind of looks like it stops there, but then remember Anthea talked about the fact that we're kind of reworking some of the complete streets language into a new section. So that's part of why this is coming out of here. So basically, the sections that we just talked about on pages 37 and 38 are all fine. Then we get into sort of the rework of the chapter. And the definition of complete streets made sense to us. The state policy that except in the case of projects or project components involving unpaved highways, all projects and project phases, goes on to describe those, shall to incorporate complete street principles. So it's directing us to incorporate these principles, and I'm on page 39, and now I'm on line 7, are both permanent. This would be complete streets principles that are both permanent and temporary as necessary for each project phase. Number 2, to prioritize underserved communities that have been historically harmed and segmented by the transportation network. And I would just pause there for a moment to indicate that the complete streets analysis, we don't receive the projects because they are complete streets. We receive the projects and then we analyze them as complete streets projects.
Through a lens, a complete street.
Yeah,
lens.
the lens. So I would say that we haven't been in to talk to you about this, but there's a very comprehensive equity framework project that we are undertaking to help us better identify the communities identified in this section on lines 9 through 10, and to make sure that all phases of our efforts have a lens that considers the needs of these communities and addresses them regardless of which phase of the project we are in and which kind of project. So it's not just, it's everything. And then also how Justice 40, if the feds get around to defining how that's going to work, will fit into all of that. So I don't know that this section, belongs in here necessarily, but just flag that.
So I think when I have a question too, but go ahead, Representative Dodge.
I could wait.
Oh, okay. So it might be, if there's a way, I think the General Assembly and the administration both have been kind of building in, taking into account equity, using an equity lens around all the projects. And it sounds like this is a project that is already underway at AOT. Is there a way for it to land somewhere around complete streets in some? I just think that that's that the intent of this language is, even though I was not involved in developing this language, I think that is what it is. So
I agree that is a possibility. I would say if we could remove the word prioritize, because we're not going to all right, let's just say we select, there's 10 bike ped projects that have been selected, are prioritized to move forward. And if we were wanting to prioritize the projects based on those historically harmed and segmented by the transportation network, that would be a filter we would apply in our prioritization metrics, which are in a different part of statute, versus under this lens of complete streets that we would be applying to all of those projects. What we could do, though, is on the next 2 lines where it says principles, and sort of the lead in is principles that serve individuals of all ages and abilities, including vulnerable users as defined, and addresses underserved communities that have been historically harmed and segmented. So we could put it there and instead of using the word prioritize.
Just eliminate the word prioritize.
Yeah, just because this isn't the place where we prioritize activities, there's a different place.
There's a
Can you
judge?
speak about, so you're saying that within the state policy, you don't want to put that we are prioritizing within complete streets the lens of historically underserved communities?
I think what I'm trying to say is the prioritization process that we undergo to select projects that will come into the program has a numerous number of factors, which include things like resiliency, economic development, safety, et cetera. And so basically, at that point in the filter, when we have the world of projects and they're being prioritized at the regional level, that's where we would prioritize for these factors. Once they sort of get prioritized and rise above that spot, then we use our design principles, which Complete Streets is a design principle, to basically figure out how we are going to set up the, design the project. And then at that point, we would use the structural pieces related to complete streets design to design the project with, regardless of which community it came from. So it's kind of back in the sort of lead up to your project has been selected, where we would address communities, underserved communities, and so that we are getting those projects into the list sooner. Does that make sense?
I'm just trying to get the order in which, just in like one sentence, at what point do you want to consider, or rather not just consider, but prioritize underserved communities? At what point in the planning process would the agency like to prioritize historically underserved communities?
Yes, so that would be in the section of statute that deals with our prioritization process.
So not, there is, it is in a, yeah.
You have that, and you're also working on this equity.
So the equity framework that I mentioned is going to come out with a number of recommendations, and that process is going to be, I believe, finishing up later this year. And so we would have statutory recommendations where our policy needs to be adjusted to reflect the equity framework outcomes. We would have potentially like outreach and communications and education elements in terms of our communications plan that would have to be edited to reflect the outcomes of the equity framework. We would have, engagement, like if we're going out to do a presentation to a community about the design of the project, say we're at that point where we're ready to talk about, you all decided you want to do this, we did a plan for it, there was public engagement there, now we're like ready to show you the plan, the design plan. We would figure out at that point, like, how are we going to engage these communities so that everybody has a chance to say, that works for me, that doesn't work for me, this is what we need. And that might mean creating special compensation for people to come to the meeting and different things. So there's this whole world of equity that we are sort of getting our head around, along with what the legislature did last year, which is kind of like a little bit of an overlap in terms of how state government addresses equity in all the things it does. But we were kind of ahead of that process, and we were taking this deeper dive into comprehensively addressing equity across the entire framework of our work. So you will hear more about that.
I think what Michelle's saying is that there is work, we can bring some language to this section of the bill, but the larger work that's happening in policy is not in this, this is not the right place because it's happening in another place. Does that make? And if you want, that might be worth having a.
Yeah,
I can connect you with our project manager, and he can take you into a much deeper dive on that. And obviously, if the community has time during the session at some point, we can bring an update in about the equity framework project.
It could be really interesting,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we've
That's a
heard
big
about
bus.
so many projects, and we've heard about so much of the budgeting, and we've heard about a lot of the challenges, right? Particularly in trying to be respectful of, regional differences. And this is the first time that I've heard of an equity lens
Yes.
in the AOT. And it's only to hear that you want to take away the word prioritize. So that's why I'm a little trying to understand how it's like what you're saying is it's baked into the process. So putting it in at this point doesn't serve us. And so so that's why I'm just trying to learn more about that.
I understand.
So suddenly it's just dropped into this conversation as only to say this isn't part of this conversation. So so thank you.
Okay, well, I think we will definitely get some more information, but I think what I'm hearing Michelle say is that this equity issue is built into a prioritization process.
Yes.
Because the complete streets, we have to remember, it's not a grant program, right? It's a lens,
That's a lot
it's a framework,
Yeah.
so. But these are really, I'm glad you're raising these, we're talking about this, so. All right,
Yeah.
great.
Okay. So jumping down to line 13, follow best state of practice design guidance, and then number 5, are sensitive to surrounding community, including current and planned buildings, parks, trails, et cetera. That's all wonderful, and part of what we do already. Line 17, projects not incorporating complete streets principles. So here we're talking about the state projects first. State managed projects shall incorporate complete streets principles unless the project manager makes a written determination, which is what we do now, supported by documentation, and that one or more of the following circumstances exist. 1, use of the transportation facilities by bike ped users is prohibited by law. Think about the interstate and limited access highways. The cost of incorporating complete streets principle is grossly disproportionate to the need or probable use as determined by factors including land use, et cetera. I would pause here and say that grossly disproportionate is undefined and leaves a lot of room for subjectivity, and we would look to for a different language to better help us better describe how to determine whether the investment is
Representative Coker brought that up the other day too. Representative Burke.
Yeah, I wonder if there was some way to quantify that. In terms of
Percentage.
percentage or something like that. I can work with you,
I think quantifying it would be good. I would want to have more data about what the ramifications would be in terms of, and we would probably want to take some of the projects where we've not applied the complete streets principles because of the cost differential, and, analyze, like, if we were to apply this percentage, what would the project costs have been, and could the project have gone forward, or what would have been displaced? So putting a percent on, we decided not to put a bridge on the Thetford Lime, put a sidewalk on the Thetford Lime Bridge going across to New Hampshire. It's a 400-foot span, and what would the cost have been? It would have potentially been so significant that the project couldn't have gone forward in that way. But because of the scale of the project, if you apply a straight percentage, then you get into distorted numbers, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there's a little more analysis, I think, that we would want to get into there in order to determine what the right level of investment is. And I can find out from our staff if what we have available to us right now in terms of data.
Representative Lally.
Yeah, I think this would be a really great spot to clarify what instead of going with grossly disproportionate, clarify what the criteria are to be eligible for, make some kind of reference to that in statute, that one of the, when we rebuild a bridge in a village, and it is a 100-year investment, but unless there is an existing plan to have a sidewalk or something there, the bridge doesn't get built with the sidewalk. I mean, that seems a really short-sighted view that in 100 years from now, there will be no demand for walking and biking, particularly as we're trying to figure out where to locate all this housing. So something that could address some of that, rather than just, it's too expensive, But this just seems very vague to me. So some place-based criteria, that could, this gets into a lot of other things that are beyond this, but developing the capacity and so on to envision a place that could be capable of supporting this infrastructure. But
it sounds like you have some good ideas, maybe that you could be part of the
yeah.
contributing to some of the
Yeah, because I think right now we do look at, local and regional plans, which are long-range plans. They're not 100-year plans, obviously. But, looking at land use, like if there's, if there's a bridge that's in between communities on a state route where there's no pedestrian access for miles, obviously we're not going to do something there. But we certainly are trying to look at like what's the sort of core of this community and what's the likelihood, even if this bridge is on the edge of the community now, that it's going to someday accommodate these users. Like, we need to be thinking about that. So happy to sort of take a deeper dive into that as well. So we'll work on that section related to costs. The other, number 3 on line 11, was incorporating Complete Streets principles outside the limited scope of a maintenance project that does not involve the reconstruction of any infrastructure. And an example of that is when we do a thin overlay paving project, and we're not doing any like structural work on the shoulders. We're just trying to get an inch of pavement on there to get you through until when the real job comes through. There's probably other good examples, so that makes sense. And then municipal projects, I think, are basically described in the same way through the end of that page and into, when you get down to line 8 of page 41 is where the section transitions. And this is finality of determinations. The written determinations required by sections A and B of this section shall be final and shall not be subject to appeal or further review. And that makes sense. Posting of determinations, the written determinations would be posted on the municipality's website or the agency's website. I know we post our determinations already on the state website, so that might be something to flag for the league, like can towns realistically do that? I know we have the regional planning commissions collect the local determinations from the towns on an annual basis, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And so that's something to think about.
Yeah, that's a good flag. I think we've heard from we've gotten some feedback and we've talked about a lot this session about capacity of smaller towns. I mean, we want to we want to give incentives and maybe, but some flexibility without letting them off the hook. So
Absolutely.
Maybe some language around that would be helpful.
And then line 16, annual report, public database. We are certainly happy to come back and report annually to the General Assembly what the outcome of our Complete Streets reviews was. But just developing a database, at least in particular, going back to 2011, which is the base year that this is asking for on page 42, line 5, is a rather large and rather large effort that would consume a significant amount of staff time. And I guess we're kind of thinking let's go forward. Let's invest our resources and our efforts in understanding we're getting close to adopting the Complete Streets Guide update that you heard from John Kaplan about. That's going to have revised recommendations for our designers, for consultants, et cetera, for municipalities to consider. And then we're going to be getting into the Vermont state standards. And so, we're happy to come up with some sort of database or spreadsheet probably that would allow people to find these Complete Streets projects and, but I also again wonder every project, is evaluated. So think about how big the book is and how many projects are in the book. I guess, do you want a database of every project in the book and a checkbox as to whether they incorporated Complete Streets or not, what they incorporated or they didn't, and then a link to the reason why and the documentation. I'm wondering if this element of a database and a reporting process maybe is something we should talk more about and come back next year with a recommendation. Just a suggestion.
Representative Burke, do you have any comments on that? You worked on this section of the bill, so just about the idea of a coming back with a recommendation,
I mean, I think that, I mean, when we did the bill initially in 2011, there was supposed to be a report every year to the legislature. And then, so we would get this report, these are the projects that we did and that were incorporated. And then I think that sort of went back to, you can check on the website.
Okay.
I think you have been doing that, but I think it's been that, I don't know if there's some way to report to the legislature.
Yeah.
That this is what we did, this is how we considered, you know, if that makes sense to you. Is that?
I need to talk to my people more. I think it would be something that would occur, you know, it's like, when do we report this? Do we report this at the end of the planning process? Or do we report this at the end of the design phase when we're ready to go to construction? There's a nuance there, because if we report, I mean, we can report to you how we did it. We have this whole other process of engagement in individual projects. So I just want to better understand from them where the best place to do that would be, and could we do that on the 200 projects that are under development in that particular year? Is there a checkbox that the project manager could, you know, sort of identify, and how much detail would we need? So there's a lot to think through there, and we're happy to work on that with you and with Kelly to sort of bring us back to a more normalized and transparent place of reporting on this.
Transparency.
Yep.
The issue.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, thanks, that's really helpful. That's, I think, section 23 is just the database again, and then state standards, and you've already talked about that.
Yeah, and we got, that was, yes.
Is that all right to put that in the bill, or we say the agency is
Um,
accepting the standards? I mean, how do you want to? Sorry, I didn't.
Madam Chair, I can respond if that would be appropriate. So section 24 talks about the Vermont State Standards update that you heard from Rob and Aaron about. Line 19 is the date. And I think you heard from them that the date is not going to be, 2024 is not going to be feasible. And I would say that considering the legislative cycle, maybe like not later than December 31st of 2025, because we had envisioned this to be about a 24 to 30 month process, and we'll be getting started this summer.
We heard,
Yeah.
I think you,
I need to know that.
yeah, I think we heard that from Aaron, Susan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to just have it referenced in the bill would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we want to reference that the agency is, you know, yeah. So I can work with Anthea on that.
So I want to make sure that we give, and we heard from the folks the other day, we want to reference that they're doing it now.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing project.
Yep.
I want to be careful about compressing the timeline for them so much that we don't give them enough time. And I'm not sure 25 is even enough, because I think they talked about a 3-year project.
Okay, I'll double check. Yeah.
Got
Okay.
consultants and did all the work they need to do.
Okay.
Unrealistic time.
Yeah.
It could also be within another year.
Well,
This year.
maybe instead of putting a date in, we could report back on the progress next year. And so it's in the bill, standards are important, and we report back next year.
Yeah, I'd rather do that. A drop dead deadline is probably, in this case, not going to work very well.
There's an expectation of a grant there too, that.
No, in this case, this is not a grant. This is programmatic funding that we've already put in. And we did, I think Aaron mentioned, we received confirmation from Federal Highway last week that they, or maybe earlier this week, that they would accept our,
So it's already.
yeah. So we are good on the money in terms of the federal commitment.
Also, when you're thinking of this, Michelle, we asked them to retitle Vermont State Standards, something that reflects.
Yeah, I think for now, we're going to leave it because we haven't come up with the name yet, but we do know we want to change the name. So it's a great point. Maybe
I already have the name, but I
what will replace? Okay, and then I just quickly note on page 43, the top of, in line 1, section 25, funding for municipal training on complete streets. So we have money to do training. We have a training center that has a budget. We don't need to appropriate an additional amount of funding. We would be happy to entertain a recommendation outside of adding money to it that we work with these folks to, I guess in consultation, like the Climate Council, they have other work to do. They have a lot of work. The League of Cities and Towns and the regional planning commissions are really more of the stakeholder groups that are like doing the on the ground work on complete streets and trying to get their communities and the planning commissions and communities and DRBs to be thinking about complete streets. So my recommendation would be that we design a program in consultation with the league and the planning commissions, and that we provide training on complete streets. And this would be on our new guide, so the timing would be good. And take it that way and just leave out the Climate Council.
Representative Burke?
So that it would be like a training that you could package, that you could give to each town.
Yeah, and you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, I think it was you, that Massachusetts has a good training program that I've heard about. And so I don't think we need to put that in statute, but the Massachusetts training program.
You could say that the state will develop a training program that would be applicable to all towns. And that the towns could access funds from the training center.
Well, they won't access funds from the training center. We would host probably potentially in person, but an online, training that could be recorded, and people could go and they could, select and review the trainings at their own leisure, that sort of thing. So they can put the information out. We work with them on that. And the timing will be good because we will just finish that update on the guide. And so, I think that's probably the better way to go about this.
That's great. I think we kind of, I don't know, I'm with my notes, I think we covered those sections that we had hoped to get your feedback on.
Yeah, and I'll go back and comb through here related to the reports. And I could then maybe send you something that could be shared with the committee about our perspective on other reports that are recommended in here. If that might be a good starting point.
I think that'd be great. That'd be very helpful. Representative Dodge.
Any considerations that you've done, within that baking process, I'd love to hear about for the, whether it was addressing this specifically about changing language in the proposed H101 or, I guess that, I mean, how you came to the conclusion that this does fit in with prioritizing.
Yeah. So I guess what I was trying to say is that we are in the middle of our equity framework development to receive the recommendations on all the places we can incorporate equity into all of our processes. And that, and we could talk about that with the committee, but we don't have a recommendation for any statutory changes yet because we're not done. We're still working on those. I think we finished our public outreach portion of this work, but now we're sort of into the report writing and the recommendation analysis and how we come out with that. So we can update you on that, and then next year we would be back for more, maybe substantial recommendations.
And that might be something that we could have as a presentation to the committee, even this session. Like we could have that as a.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if we're gonna be asked to make big decisions about where we're putting our money, which is basically expressing our values of what we deem important, and we haven't been educated about how why this will help, this part of our state. then it's not gonna be a well-informed decision.
So we'll get an update, but we do need to let the agency finish their work on it. Like, I think we have to.
Oh, yeah, I'm not asking for
Great.
your final decision, I'm asking for a report on the work that has been done up to now, that's all I'm asking.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Okay.
Well, thank you. Wow,
Nice timing.
yeah, that was terrific.
Thank you, everyone, and good suggestions, and I will work with Anthea, Representative Burke, and anyone else I may know about, and.
Okay, that sounds, thank you so much, Michelle. That's great. All right, so we are right on time. We're even 5 minutes early. I just want to say to the committee, if you need to take a break to use, to stretch or something, but we're going to continue. That's fine if you need to get some water or whatever, but we're on time. We're even a little bit early. And I think we have our folks here who are going to be at 12. We start at 11:55. Ross, are you ready?
I am.
Thanks for coming in and being back with us, and I'll give you a minute. Do you need to set up for anything?
Set up.
Conversation. Okay, great. So we, as a committee, we invited Ross McDonald to come back, who is our public transit program manager, to come back. We've covered a lot of the public transit budget with Ross. We've had him in a couple of times, and to set up the conversation, we know that there's been a request from Green Mountain Transit to help out and help them out with zero fare and transitioning to collecting fares at a time certain. So we asked you to go off and do some thinking and have some conversations, and so we wanted to hear how your thinking and conversations have been progressing and what we might be able to contemplate where it comes to the FY24 budget proposal.
Well, thank you very much
Back.
having me. For the record, Ross McDonald, the Public Transit Program Manager. And yes, since last week and before last week and every week, we are trying to assess where our providers are, the current services, the planned services, opportunities, challenges. And GMT is no different. It's just a little bit more nuanced because of the difference between the urban and rural divisions that, process funds differently, directly and otherwise. So certainly looking at our budget and to restate, when we put the budget together and looking at state funds, working with GMT staff, the anticipation was they would return to fares July 1. The board did vote to proceed with that staff recommendation. And so it's an extra $1 million certainly isn't in our current budget that we were anticipating to obligate for zero fare continuation. So there's quite a few things we can do. And just as my coordinator, Tim Bradshaw, 20 years manager over at the facility, can work with staff and help them on the implementation schedule, on the procurement of the fare boxes, those types of things. We also could look to GMT's reserves to ask them to cover any budget gaps during the period of time in FY24 where they would have to remain zero fare as they institute the fare box infrastructure and mechanisms, outreach, all of those things. So that's where we are. We've been able to speak with the guidance that I receive, and that we would rather stick to our original plans of not investing in zero fare service at the GMT urban service. As discussed, what we pull from our state funds for urban comes off other allocations to our other providers. But we don't have that final list of impacts because I don't have the applications asking for the various capital projects. We do know that with the funding levels that we have, we can very likely sustain services where they make sense. That's the first priority. And then it comes down to the capital items, the training, those items. And so if we were to work with GMT and adjust their own budgets, our own supports, we think that we can proceed without having to spend any money directly for the zero fare piece. There's a bunch of other line items that will require state funds. In fact, we're probably going to be spending between $3.5 and $4 million in state funds on GMT with the current budget now. It just is for operations and capital items and training and planning, those types of items. So we'll adjust accordingly and help out GMT just like we do with all of our providers on an annual basis through the competitive grant application process.
So it sounds like you're reversing course a little bit. Clear, right? I mean, it sounds like you were gonna try to meet them halfway, and that's sort of, just to be clear, that's off the table. You're sticking to your original budget.
Yes, and
that's fair. I'm just trying to be clear, because
sure,
that's, last time you were in here, you were saying that we maybe possibly make it work, but after reconsideration, maybe talking to some people, we're back to what you presented.
Sure.
And that's fine.
I appreciate that, Mr. Representative. And certainly last year, I came in thinking, oh, this is a deeper dive in the budget. And this is how we deal with issues. For example, somebody is short on local funds because of whatever reasons, then we're always negotiating between those 7 providers. And so, yes, if working with GMT, looking at their cash reserves versus other people's local investments, what does that leave with them? We like to see that 2-month operating reserves in place for cash flow crunches, emergencies, almost like a zero fare situation where they're a little bit behind in the schedule. We were thinking, now that I've looked at everybody's audits, had some phone calls with our providers, I think that at this point, we could ask GMT Urban Division to man their ship, work through their current budget, and to expedite their reinstitution affairs and take their reserves to cover any of those increased costs. Looking at the increased analysis that we've done since last week, and as I've mentioned over the weekend, well, I'm going to have to put up these scenarios, and it's really just all versions of, if we added 250,000 here, then we would have to reduce 250,000 on capital, probably mostly for GMT. So what does that do to their capital plans? And all of that really does go through the application and negotiation process as we work toward the awards. So we have a lot of those conversations to take. But at this point, we think on that fare-free issue, we don't necessarily have to obligate in anticipation in advance of those applications from everybody else and keep it fair and aligned with everybody else's requests in that same timeline.
Can I translate that?
I did. I translated, he untranslated.
So I think I'm hearing you say that some sort of a fare-free program with GMT could continue for a certain period of time just by working within your budget and moving some stuff around and working with them to help them get to a place where they would be eventually charging for it without any impact on the rest of the transportation fund.
I think so. And those are the nuances that we get to once we say, okay, well, if it's going to cost you an extra $250,000 for this period of time to say zero fare, we know that they have been able to identify the funds for the fare boxes. Okay, that's capital. Okay, what about operations, outreach? Shortening that time frame. If we work with them on their capital program, what is that if they're paying $250,000, for example, on the budget impacts of zero fare for a few months in FY21? Well, what does that do to their capital program? Are we able to provide, more than 5% for a vehicle or maybe 10% for this capital item, depending on where they are with their budgets, where they are with their reserves, in relation to everybody else's budgets and reserves and needs. That's what we do every year.
Thank you.
Well, this took a lot less time than I thought, but I also know that we do have the general manager from Green Mountain Transit in here too. And I appreciate the work that you've done on this, Ross. And Clayton, can I ask you to comment on this?
Sure.
Because I mean, we just need your help working together for us to be able to come to a good place. Because I think we all care about public transit in Vermont. We, zero fare was put in place because of the pandemic and for the safety of our drivers, to support essential workers, to make sure our public transit system didn't implode. And now we're emerging, all of us, in all these different sectors, but public transit, we're emerging from this and how we do it. And we had testimony in that zero fare report that really, I think, backed up the agency's budget request this year, where there should continue to be fare free and where we need to have fares come back. We've also heard testimony that, about how our service providers have to go, whether it's to towns or to businesses or universities to support that. So I think I'm just bringing us back to that place where we were in the discussion. And what I think I understood was an impediment to Green Mountain Transit going back to having fares was the fare boxes. So I think when you're saying capital, do you mean fare boxes?
I do.
Just making sure I'm following along. So I think we don't want to do harm. I think I don't want to do harm to any public transit, but we also don't have infinite resources to continue to do this. So hoping that I just want to get your, so anyway, pardon me for being on my soapbox, but I just want to make sure that I'm starting from the same place in the conversation and that the committee is there. So Clayton, is this possible? What Ross is saying, how's that landing with Green Mountain Transit?
Well, I can tell you, for the record, Clayton Clark, General Manager for Green Mountain Transit. This is a perfect example of balancing that government needs to decide. We could follow the path that Ross is recommending. It will mean that we will exhaust our COVID relief funds much faster than expected. That will result in cuts in service. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Earlier in the week, we had discussed possibly having me come and provide our testimony from GMT. I can tell you that in recent years, GMT really hasn't been in the building, and I think that it shows. And so I think that you should be hearing from GMT directly, and I would like to be able to do that. Yeah. And so what I can do is I can talk to you next week about what we're doing to get our capital infrastructure in place so that we can collect fares. But I think it's also important for you all to know the full potential impact of returning the fares, because one of the things that I'll present upon is that we do receive a direct federal appropriation that is based in part on ridership. And so if we do have a significant decrease in ridership, we could be losing millions of dollars in FTA funds that would essentially mean that we're collecting funds for no purpose. And so I would love to be able to talk to you all about that in a more coherent way, and also to bring with me a finance person that can answer questions about what the impact would be if we were to try to do this internally.
Okay, so it's not, I think we should give you fair warning to have you come back and give testimony. So we'll have you come back next week. We'll work, so go ahead, Representative Shaw.
When you come back, I'd be interested in knowing how many communities financially support your operation in your service area.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you'll find is that's a very different model depending on the urban area, which is the traditional GMT area that has the Board of Commissioners, where we actually issue an assessment, sort of like property taxes. And then the areas that we expanded to in about a decade, where it's a much more voluntary.
I'm familiar with the voluntary system in my county very well.
Okay. Other questions, Representative Dodge?
I wanted to just thank you for bringing, sending out the customer service rider survey results that were done. I guess the most recent one was that said, on page 7, that the reasons for using CCTA buses, 75% of riders had no car for this trip, could not have made the trip without the bus. You listed a bunch of potential partners. The biggest users of the bus are Fletcher Allen, UVM, or I guess now it's UVM Medical Center, University of Vermont, State of Vermont, IBM or Global Foundries, People's United, St. Michael's College, and Howard Center. How would you make this trip if you couldn't? Walk, try to get a ride from a friend or family. I have some other highlights. The majority of riders are 19 to 35-year-olds who are pretty much Vermont's future generation. 38% of people had 0 cars in their household. The people using the bus, by race breakdown was that it was 15% of bus riders are BIPOC, which is, as we all know, much higher than general population so it's definitely outsized. 37% of the riders get some kind of aid. 40% earn less than $20,000. The median income is $23,800.
So Representative.
So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, so just so people, that was, we have received that on February 14th, it's on our committee page.
Yeah, we just hadn't had time to discuss it yet,
Yeah.
so I just wanted to point it out as we're talking about this,
Yeah.
taking in the equity lens.
So we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that too when we have testimony next week from Clayton.
And just one other thing I'd like to do is that with me today is Curtis Clough. Curtis is with the Teamsters, and the Teamsters are critical for GMT. All of our mechanics, all of our drivers are members of the Teamsters Union. And he and I were originally scheduled to meet today. And since I needed to be here so that I could hear this testimony, I brought him along. And I also hope that next week I'll bring a driver or two with me so that you can hear exactly what the experience is from our drivers when it comes to Zero Fare.
Great. And if you do have more recent updated rider survey results, that I think would be helpful to the committee too, because I think it would be.
Yeah, and the comments too collected are really powerful. Just the testimony of actual riders who need this service.
Sure, but it's from 2014, so if there is updated stuff, I think that would be really.
We were scheduled to do another survey in 2020. It got disrupted because of the pandemic, and so our next scheduled one is next year. And so
Okay.
unfortunately, that is our most recent data.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. Any other questions from the committee for Ross? So I don't think we've solved this yet. This is something that we will be working through. Thank you. More testimony. So thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. So committee, this has been a good week. We got a lot done. And we're ending a little bit early. So hope you have a good weekend. And we'll see you on. And our live stream.